I'm your host Yeshi with another episode of South Asia Focus. Let's begin the show. A proactive and committed Indian government has evacuated nearly all its citizens, most of whom were students, from the war-hit Ukraine through its massive evacuation effort under the banner Operation Ganga. And not just this. In what could be genuinely referred to as a humanitarian exercise, the government of India has also saved non-Indians, including a Pakistani girl who heaped praise on New Delhi for its act of humanity.
This is one of the latest batches of medical students from Ukraine to have touched down the Air Force base near Indian capital, New Delhi. Over 100 students, some accompanied by their pets, arrived at the airport in northern Ghaziabad city. An Indian student was killed by shelling in the eastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv last week, prompting New Delhi to step up demands for safe passage to evacuate thousands of its nationals trapped in the war zone. The government, with a massive logistics arrangement, not only brought students stuck at the border, but also from the areas that were under siege. The movement became possible after a humanitarian corridor was created by both the countries at war. And while some had been directly transported, others were picked and airlifted from the border countries of Ukraine. The students said a few more were left in the country. The government has assured that everybody will be brought back under the Operation Ganga that has already reached its last phase, with nearly all being evacuated.
ये दो ऐसे शहर थे जहाँ सबसे बदतर हालात थे, तो अब चलो ऊपर वाले की दया से हम सब निकल चुके हैं, सुरक्षित निकल चुके हैं, लेकिन हमारे अब भी कुछ दोस्त सुमी में अटके हुए हैं। वो होंगे 100-150 के करीब होंगे, तो उम्मीद है कि वो जहाँ तक है 1-2 दिन में आ जाते हैं बाहर, पोलैंड बॉर्डर साइड से निकल जाएं, बाकी देखो क्या होता है।
The foreign ministers from Russia and Ukraine met in Turkey this week, but no breakthrough could be reached, a warning signal for those who continue to remain trapped in the war-torn country. Russia's invasion has already uprooted more than 2 million people in what the United Nations calls the fastest humanitarian crisis in Europe since World War II. Foreign nationals, predominantly medical students from different countries, have been flown back, with India leading the evacuation operations. Through constant engagement with both sides, the government has tried to ensure that its citizens do not face troubles even during the stranded phase.
चौप बॉर्डर, फिर हंगरी बॉर्डर, फिर रोमानिया, उसके बाद इंडिया है, तो कोई दिक्कत नहीं हुई हमें।
In the massive exercise, apart from the private commercial flights, the Indian Air Force had flown 12 missions to bring back nearly 2,500 Indian nationals. As per the data provided by the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, among the civilian flights, 4,575 passengers have been brought from Bucharest by 21 flights, 1,821 from Suceava by 9 flights, 5,571 from Budapest by 28 flights, 909 passengers by 5 flights from Kosice, 2,404 Indians from Rzeszów by 11 flights, and 242 persons by a flight from Kyiv. However, what has been lauded across the global forum is the country's endeavour towards humanity above all. A Pakistani citizen was among 17 foreign nationals who were rescued by India from the seized territory of Sumy amid continuous bombing by Russia. Overall, a Pakistani national, a Nepalese citizen, 2 Tunisian and 13 Bangladeshi nationals were rescued by India. Asma expressed her gratitude to the Indian government for safely evacuating her from the bombing zone.
I'm really thankful to the embassy of Indian Embassy of Kiev for supporting us all the way here, as we were stuck in very difficult situations, and also thanking the Prime Minister of India, and thank you so much for supporting us, and hope we get home safely because of the Indian Embassy.
The government, however, says the mission is not over until the last stranded citizen returns home. It will continue to send more flights and relief material for those who have been affected by the war. New Delhi has sent over 32 tons of relief till now. India's stance, unlike many others, has been neutral since the war broke out. However, the government has appealed for peace and cessation while sending aid and assistance to the affected.
Moving on, in news from Afghanistan, the women in the country came out and narrated their plight under the Taliban rule when the rest of the world marked International Women's Day. The Taliban, who have been asking for global recognition and have managed to receive more than one form of assistance from global bodies and countries like India, are accused of doing nothing to protect the rights of women in the country. In fact, they face the charge of suppressing women's freedoms and rights, the principal pretext under which many countries have denied providing it with the required aid, relief or financial assistance.
Hope and motivation have fizzled out for women in Afghanistan since the Taliban took control of the country in August last year. The restrictions imposed in line with the hardline interpretation of the Islamic law have stifled their voices that had begun to grow in a progressive environment under the West-backed government. The situation has turned upside down. As per the local media houses that have also been at the receiving end of the Taliban crackdown, the Afghan women were barred from even gathering to mark International Women's Day, let alone organizing any event. There have been a few voices of resistance, but that doesn't appear to be enough to counter an ultra-orthodox culture being imposed by the Taliban. Hasina Motsam, a student, called on women around the country to raise their voices to defend their rights.
و اول تسلیت بر شما میگویم که بعضی خانم‌ها درست است که وظیفه خود از دست دادن، اما باید صدای خود بکشن، هیچگاه خاموش نشینند و ما هم در مقابل ظلم‌های اینا ایستاد میشیم و پیام به کسایی که حقوق ما را پایمال میکنن این است: ما خاموش نشیشتیم و بعد از این هم خاموش نمیشیم، صدای خود میکشیم و از حقوق خود دفاع میکنیم.
The expansion of women's rights, particularly in urban areas, was held up as one of the main achievements of Western military and financial intervention in Afghanistan after the US-led war that toppled the last Taliban government in 2001. Until then, in addition to the education ban, almost all jobs were off limits to women, and they could only leave home when accompanied by a male relative and wearing an all-enveloping burqa. Female enrollment was around 24% of the total signed up at public universities in 2020, according to figures from the World Bank-funded Higher Education Development Program, roughly 21,000 women. However, things set off towards south as soon as Taliban grabbed the hold of the power. Women say they are not allowed to gather for even symbolic customs they would mark during previous regime.
خب باید بگوییم که در سابق که بود یعنی نسبتاً بسیار پررنگتر بود. روز جهانی زن، از روز جهانی زن بسیار به شکل درستش مردم تجلیل میکردن، اما فعلا که یعنی نظام که تغییر کرده و این تحولات آمدن، بعض زنها یعنی خانه نشین شدن، از کارهای خود سبکدوش شدن، اینا ترس دارن و فعلا مقدر به نظر من تجلیل نمیکنن این روزا.
The Taliban demand that they should now be treated at par with other sovereign countries of the world. It wants to join global bodies and form its own alliances. The concerns over women's rights, however, continue to expand as the group has failed to do anything vis-à-vis the protection or empowerment of women. In fact, there have been cases where women have fallen victim to the reprisal attack carried out by the Taliban. And with the crackdown only getting severe by the day, the future of the gender appears bleak, with observers insisting time and again the situation only worsen if the Taliban get what they have been demanding from the international community.
Moving on, after the long hours of load shedding we reported last week, it is the operations of public transport and cooking gas supply that Sri Lanka is grappled with in the current economic crisis in the island nation. Long queues and perennially complaining citizens seems to have become a regular affair in the country. People say their lives have turned upside down since the government imposed a host of restrictions owing to an unprecedented depletion in the country's forex reserves.
Dozens of vehicles and people with jerry cans could be seen queuing outside a petrol station in the capital Colombo as fuel shortages hit the public transportation sector. Even the cooking gas supplies have nearly dried up amid the country's worst economic crisis in a decade. The island nation's foreign exchange reserves have plunged to record lows. Inflation has soared and the Sri Lankans are suffering hours-long power cuts among a wide range of problems that have descended upon them since the crisis cropped up. People say they are losing patience with the government policies as they are facing hardships in almost every sphere of their lives.
මේ දවස්වල අය හැමදාම පොලිම් තමයි ඉතින් කිරිපිටි පොලින් අර පොලිම් මේ දැන් තෙල් පොලිම් මේ දැන් උදේ මම කිරිපිටි පොලිමේ ඉඳලා මේ එන ගම මේ බැයි නම් අයියේ අපිට දුන්නා නම් ඊට වඩා ලස්සනට මම වැඩේ කරනවා.
A vendor who sells liquefied petroleum gas cylinders, which is mainly used for cooking, said he hasn't received a shipment in a week.
සාමාන්‍යයෙන් අපිට දවස් දෙකෙන් දෙකට ගෑස් 100ක් විතර එන තැනක් මෙතන විකුණන තැනක්. ඉතින් දැනට ගෑස් සතියක් තිස්සේ ගෑස් එන්නෙම නැහැ. ව්‍යාපාරේ ඔක්කොම දැන් පාඩු තත්ත්වෙටම තමයි දුවන්නේ.
Experts point out that the Sri Lankan crisis is the result of the several ill-informed decisions taken by the government in the past. Sri Lanka's imports rose by 28.5% to $20.6 billion in 2021, with the largest expenditure of $1.2 billion made on fuel. Higher global commodity prices and supply issues have pushed Sri Lanka's inflation to 16.1% in February, among the highest rates in Asia. The head of the country's private bus owners association, Gamu Vijayaratne, said only 25% of the association's buses could be deployed due to the fuel shortage.
හෙට දිනේ අපිට ධාවනය කරන්න වෙන්නේ බස් රථ 100ට ධාරිතාවෙන් 125යි. අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම 125ත් අඩුවීමකට තමයි තියෙන්නේ. අපි මේ ඉන්ධන පෝලිං වල ඉඳලා අපි බස් රථ 4000ත් 5000ක අතර ප්‍රමාණයක් තමයි ධාවනය කරන්න කටයුතු කරන්නේ. මේ තියෙන මේ අඩුව නවත්ත ගන්න එක නවක් ඇවිල්ලා වැඩක් නැහැ. නැව් පහක්වත් එකම මොහොතක එන්න අවශ්‍යතාවය. ඒ නිසා දැන් මුදල් ප්‍රශ්න තියෙනවා. ඒ නිසා කරුණාකරලා කියන්නේ ඩොලර් එක පාවීමට ඒ කියන්නේ ෆ්ලෝට් කරන්න කටයුතු කරන්න. එතකොට මේ බැංකු වලට ඩොලර් එනවා හැමදාම.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who has been at the center of public ire, has appointed new ministers for energy and power in a snap cabinet reshuffle. Meanwhile, after the appeal made by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka to the government asking it to curb non-essential imports to encourage banks to prioritize essentials such as fuel and medicines, the government has limited imports of 367 non-essential items including fish, footwear and wine. Sri Lanka is battling a severe foreign exchange crunch, with official reserves having dipped to $2.36 billion as of end January, and the government is due to repay debt of about $4 billion in the remainder of this year.
Time now for Asia This Week, the stories from across the continent.
Turkey hosted the foreign ministers' meet of Russia and Ukraine in its southern province of Antalya on the sidelines of a diplomacy forum this week. Delegations from the two countries have held 3 rounds of talks previously, 2 in Belarus and 1 in Ukraine. Despite some positive signs on humanitarian arrangements, those negotiations have had little impact. Moscow calls its incursion a special military operation to disarm Ukraine and dislodge leader it calls neo-Nazis. Kyiv and its Western allies dismiss that as baseless pretext for an unprovoked war against a democratic country of 44 million people. It has been nearly 3 weeks since Russia launched the operation that has taken a massive toll on lives and property in Ukraine. Meanwhile, President Zelensky of Ukraine has climbed down on West, saying it has not provided the necessary assistance it was expected to provide during crisis. Saudi Arabia attracted $21.6 billion of investments in the industrial sector in 2021 for both the private sector and joint ventures with government entities, the Saudi industry minister claimed this week. The kingdom has set itself high targets of diversifying its economy and reducing its dependence on oil, pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into a plan called Vision 2030, initiated by de facto ruler Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The prince's plan is centered on developing a homegrown industry, but there have been snags and delays as the kingdom has struggled with a lack of skilled labor, bureaucratic hitches, and challenges related to cost and technology transfers. A series of joint ventures between Saudi firms and top global aerospace and defense manufacturers have been announced in recent years as part of the strategy to localize some industrial capabilities. Saudi authorities say much of the plan is still in its initial phase and money will increasingly start pouring into the kingdom over the next few years. The minister said the kingdom is ready to work with Western companies or others, regardless of their origins, as long as they share a long-term view and have the right technology needed in the kingdom. Aeon Group of Japan supports and nurtures young people through Aeon 1% Club Scholarship. In the wake of COVID-19, a scholarship completion ceremony was held online for foreign students in Japan. Barata Tripramudya Onugo is a scholarship student hailing from Indonesia. He recently graduated from Chiba University after 2 years of scholarship. He completed his computer information processing as he has a dream to be an IT specialist. He will work as a computer specialist at a Japanese company. Lia Thanth from Vietnam also received Aeon 1% Club Scholarship. She is working at Aeon Vietnam as an interpreter of Japanese and Vietnamese. Aeon one-person club steadily grows up future leaders and proves to be a bridge between Japan and rest of the world. NYK or Nippon Yusen Kabushiki Kaisha is a multiple transportation company. To contribute to environment, it has taken several initiatives in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It has set a target of net zero emission by 2050 with development of new fuel ship, participation to offshore wind power, electric generation. In 2019, NYK established a new green business group to accelerate these efforts. To survive as multiple transportation company, NYK says it understands its responsibility towards making a contribution to the environment protection.
Moving on, amidst a multi-pronged crisis that the Afghans are enduring for months, there came an instance of respite when the national sports Buzkashi was cheered and cherished at many places around the country previous week. We bring you one such coverage from the country's capital, Kabul. Have a look.
A crash of horses and man on a dusty beach signaled the start of another game of Buzkashi, Afghanistan's national sport. Buzkashi, which translates roughly as goat pulling, has been played for centuries across Central Asia and is one of the most enduring and iconic symbols of Afghanistan. The sport, similar to polo, involves two teams who try to accumulate points by propelling a headless goat carcass to the scoring area. In modern days, only fake goat carcasses are used.
احساس خوب داریم هر تیمی که خوب بازی کنه خوب برای ما او را تشویق میکنیم ولی خاصتا خو طبیعت است که هر کس باید ولایت خود تیم خود زیادتر تشویق بکنه.
It is a sport which is often violent but designed to showcase the rider's horsemanship and warrior spirit. Amid foreign invasions, civil wars and insurgent attacks, and more recently the Taliban takeover, Afghans have always gathered to cheer on their favorite Chebandas, as the riders are known. The National League matches resumed for the first time on February 24 since the Taliban took over the country in August last year. This match was a knockout match played out between the Kandahar and Badakhshan provincial teams in front of around 5,000 Afghans, including members of the Taliban.
دیگه بازی خو خیلی جالب بود دیگه تیمای ما رو خونه دیدین که چقدر هواداران زیاد آمده بود و دیگه تماشاچیم دو تیم زیاد داره دیگه هر دو تیمای قهرمان همی لیگ هم هستن.
اگر مردم ما و ملت ما از این برگزاری تا مراسم خوشحال میشوند و ما به خاطر خوشحالی ملت و مردم خود ایرا دیگه خوب است که این مسابقات برگزار شد به خاطر که ملت و مردم ما از این چیز لذت ببرند.
Previous games were often shadowed by threats of attacks, and players faced threats from people in their own province if they choose to play for another provincial team. But the Taliban's harsh crackdown on crimes have eased the mind of many, including Gulbuddin Ismail Khail, captain of the Kandahar team, last year's league champion.
Fans say the game's significance will outlast the country's current crisis, just as it has outlasted previous wars. With that, we come to the end of this week's episode. See you next week. Goodbye and take care.